Yuki Tsunoda simply isn't good enough at the moment. He's definitely got unfinished business. Cadillac comes with a lot of backing. Verstappen is such a competitive animal. Hello and welcome to the Inside Track with me, Matt Majendie. Now racing's resuming at the Dutch Grand Prix in Zandvoort this coming weekend. It's Max Verstappen territory. He's had a great record there, like he's won every single time bar last year where Lando Norris won, and you'd think it's going to be tough for Verstappen to pull it off unless Red Bull come up with some amazing trick this week. You would think it's very much the McLaren drivers that are going to dominate. We're also going to look at the latest stories that happened over the past week that it's very Red Bull heavy. So let's start with Red Bull's second driver. We know Max Verstappen staying put. That much is abundantly clear. He announced that himself. His future is there for the team for next season. Now that doesn't mean he's there for the long term. There's a lot of rumours still swirling around that he's just scoping the territory and see who's best with these new regulations in 2026 and then decide where he goes. But the sort of chat on him has slightly dampened down since he's agreed, and told everyone he's staying put for another year. What's interesting is who's going to be alongside him. Now, there's so many different rumours and conjecture on this one. The latest one that's appeared this week is Red Bull is supposedly having conversations with four-time IndyCar champion Álex Palou to come and drive along Verstappen for next season. Now, that would be a curveball. That would be going against anything that Red Bull have done previously. Obviously, he's a very experienced driver, but not experienced in Formula One. He doesn't come from there. I don't believe that one makes sense to me, and I don't see that one materializing. But there are lots of sort of suggestions that maybe Red Bull should be going down the route of a more experienced driver. Now, the reason for that is this car that they talk about, or a lot of people talk about being difficult to drive, that only Max Verstappen can handle. It'd be curious to see how that goes in the hands of someone more experienced. And there's not many more experienced than 44-year-old Fernando Alonso. Now, Jack Villeneuve, former world champion himself, was one of the people that suggested that Alonso would be perfect in that role. He was saying Yuki Tsunoda simply isn't good enough at the moment, and that he'd like to see someone like an Alonso or even a Leclerc next to Max to see how good they really are and see how difficult that car is, how good Max is. I've always been curious by this, the idea of how Max would go against a Charles Leclerc or a Lando Norris or an Aston Martin driver in Fernando Alonso, very experienced guy who's clearly very quick as well. But for me, it doesn't really make any sense to move for Alonso. Firstly, Alonso simply won't do it. He's sitting in a very exciting position at Aston Martin. And again, there's a Red Bull link here because next season he'll be driving the first designed Aston Martin Formula One car by Adrian Newey. Now, he was the mastermind at McLaren and Williams for dominant cars there. And then most recently, two dominant cars at Red Bull, a period of dominance with Sebastian Vettel winning 4 titles and a period of dominance, Max Verstappen doing the same. Now, I think this is why Alonso's staying put. He's getting a chance to drive this Newey car. So it doesn't really make any sense for Alonso to move. I think he has a good relationship with Newey, so there's nothing really happening there. As for whether a bigger name would come across, we talked in previous episodes about George Russell. There was even talk of a seat swap of Max Verstappen going to Mercedes and George coming across to Red Bull. But I'd be curious to have those two alongside each other. There's no love lost there. But really, the smart money is on Red Bull doing what they always do, which is to promote a driver from within. The smart money would be on Isaac Hadjar still making the step up. But I'm not saying that in the sense that that's a done deal. You got to think there's still plenty of time left this season for them to make a decision. They made the decision on Liam Lawson, who initially got the drive alongside Max. They made that relatively late last season, so they'll do the same again, you would think. So there's sort of interesting one in that you've got Yuki Tsunoda, who clearly hasn't been scoring points, who clearly hasn't been doing what was expected of him. There was hope that he'd consistently be in the top 10. There's mitigating factors for that. He hasn't had the upgrades of Max Verstappen, which is a big part of it. So he's in a lesser car almost, but to get those upgrades, he needs to prove himself. And so it's kind of slightly in a vicious circle. So there is the option that Yuki Tsunoda could be there next season. The way it stands, if you were to talk within the Red Bull camp, you would say that's not as likely. I mean, that's the sense I'm getting. So Hadjar is let's say in the front row for that one. But then you suddenly, and stranger things have happened, you've got Liam Lawson. Now, Lawson obviously got demoted after 2 races, not ready for it, but suddenly he's really impressed me. We've talked about this in the podcast as well, how suddenly, he had a difficult time when he went back to Racing Bulls. Confidence was shot to pieces. Laurent Mekies, his new team boss at Red Bull, talked about this, but he's built up, and actually he's been the more impressive of the drivers in the last few races. Ever since Monaco, where I think he did a really good job of backing up the field and helping his teammate, And he did a great job doing that for not as much reward for him as his teammate. He's slowly building up confidence. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility that he could take that seat. I'm not saying that will happen. That seems unlikely. We've got this little merry-go-round that seems like it might happen within Red Bull. What happens to Yuki Tsunoda? I don't know. Does he, maybe he could stay put, or does he step down? Or they look at Arvid Lindblad, who's they're very impressed with the teenager in Formula 2, that he takes the step up and goes into the Racing Bulls with a view to him being a driver of the future for Red Bull. So this merry-go-round is going to continue, I think, for quite a long period of time. We'll see in Zandvoort the rumours start of who's going where, what the Red Bull driver lineup looks, and by that I mean not just Red Bull, but also the Racing Bulls. As for this fanciful idea that you could get a Leclerc or Norris alongside Verstappen, and it's great fun. You always want to have the best drivers racing against each other within a team is fun. We loved the Prost Senna, things like that back in the day. But currently we've got one in Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, and that's going to be the title decider between those two. And they are two drivers very much at the top of the game, ebbing and flowing. So I think we should enjoy that battle. Who knows in the future where Verstappen might find himself and which driver alongside him as well. So let's go on to Christian Horner. He's officially been released from Red Bull. The first point was he was relieved of operational duties, and that's why his and Red Bull's lawyers were thrashing out the terms of his exit. Now that's officially happened now. He has been removed from that role, so he's no longer tied to the team. We don't know the full details of severance package, but you would think it's running into the multi-millions. He was on a very lucrative deal, and that's now ended. And that leaves him free to ponder the what next. This is a guy who has lived and breathed Formula One for 20 years, and there is no chance in my mind that he doesn't reappear on the grid at some point. The question is, where is that? I've always said from the outset that the one that makes the most sense is Alpine, and I continue to stand by that. Ralf Schumacher, ex-Formula One driver, brother of seven-time world champion Michael, was one of those ones who talked about it and how he doesn't see that Flavio Briatore, who's the sort of de facto boss, brought in as this sort of executive consultant of the team, and he's running the show there, doesn't see a Flavio figure as the right person to be running it anymore. He said, I think the time of figures like Flavio is over. You need technically skilled people at the top, someone like Horner. Flavio could then help as an organizer and a networker, as a face to the outside world. It's not so fanciful, the idea of Horner and Briatore working together. They're very good friends. I don't know if anyone remembers, but the sit-down interview we did with Christian Horner way back when, his last big interview before he was removed from his role as team principal and CEO, he talked about, essentially saying that Flavio is his kind of best mate of the team bosses there. It's an unlikely friendship in a way, but they've both got a wicked sense of humor. They don't mind rubbing people up the wrong way, and actually they would work well together. I know they've met up a few times, had lunch, and you would imagine conversations have turned to how they could perhaps work together in the future. I'd heard something that Horner has financial backing from elsewhere to potentially buy in or take over a team. Now, Alpine are owned by Renault, and Renault have always said that the Formula One team are not up for sale. This is their jewel in the crown kind of thing. And yet the rumours of a possible sale of Alpine have never gone away. So there's that possibility that at some point, Horner could lead a buy-in, because I think that's what he would like to do, to be a sort of overarching boss. It'd be interesting to see how it works. Alpine have really been struggling much more than I thought they would. They just don't seem to have a house in order. They lost their team principal earlier in the season, Oliver Oakes, and then Briatore came, then took over the running of that. So there's a big rebuild that needs to happen there. And Horner is exceptionally good at that. He's very good at being able to bring all the different parts of the structure of a Formula One team together and run those and make them marry. And Horner's very good at bringing in the best people into his team. Adrian Newey is the greatest example of that. That's probably the greatest signing Red Bull have ever made, because it was Newey's cars, creations in this new era of Formula One, that won 8 drivers' titles and 6 constructors' championships. So this guy is incredibly capable and brilliant, and I'd like to see Horner back on the grid. I get the sense that team bosses miss him. He used to have his clashes with the likes of Toto Wolff and Zach Brown, but F1, the grid and the paddock are poorer for his absence, and I think those guys miss him. They liked, butting heads, locking horns, whatever you want to call it. I think we'll see him back in before too long. Now, whether that's Alpine, I don't know for sure. There's other possibilities. There's a very reputable source in Germany, Auto, Motor and Sport, and they were talking about Cadillac potentially being interested in recruiting Horner. I don't think that one quite makes sense for Horner personally. This is a big American company, Cadillac manufacturer. They've got their own setup, their own ideals, their bosses. It wouldn't be something that he would be buying into necessarily. So That seems less likely to me, if I'm perfectly honest. But, never say never in Formula One. One that I quite like still is the whole Aston Martin idea. I love the fact that Adrian Newey and Christian Horner went to an Oasis gig the other day. Supposedly this frayed friendship over the last year with all the tensions and different issues within the team. But that would indicate otherwise, they're mates, and I think they've spoken and met up quite a lot. Now, that'd be quite fun, wouldn't it, to have Horner at the helm of that team? But I don't know whether Lawrence Stroll would want to give up any stake in that team, any more stake than he has, or to give up control to someone like Horner. But as someone said to me, and I think I've said before, the crazier the rumour and the possibility, the likelier it can be true in Formula One. And what better than him going to Aston Martin and reuniting with Adrian Newey? But time will tell whether we see Horner back on the grid next season. He's definitely got unfinished business. Some people have talked about him going to the FIA or Formula One or something like that, but I don't see him in that role yet. I see him as a team, all-encompassing team boss, CEO, principal. So watch this space on that one. It's interesting we talk about Cadillac because there's a lot of conjecture about that team. The 11th team on the grid, newest addition. I think they'll struggle next season, and that's not being particularly intelligent making that call. But the reality is they're absolutely starting from scratch, building up this team under Graham Loudon, their team boss. I met top hierarchy of the team in Miami, and it was interesting to hear them talking. They've got great passion for it. But a lot of the chat back then, and that's going back to May, was about their driver partnership and who that might be. That's now a done deal. Sergio Checo Perez. So here we have another Red Bull link, former driver until the end of last season when he was replaced by Liam Lawson. And then obviously Yuki Tsunoda took over from Liam. He's been sitting on the sidelines. It looked like his time in Formula One was done, but now chat is he's going to be announced later this week. It makes sense from a Cadillac perspective, big American interest, but also the Mexican interest. He has a huge following, Perez, and I'd be fascinated to see how he does. His stock took a bit of a dive alongside Verstappen last season, where he really struggled, having previously impressed in earlier seasons in the team, and the team axed him. Now suddenly when Liam Lawson struggles in that same car or a similar car, and Yuki Tsunoda struggles, suddenly Perez, by doing nothing at all, his stock has risen, which is, being on the sidelines, people now suddenly have a better perspective of him, because actually perhaps that really was a challenging car he was driving and not able to get to grips with, and some very quick drivers have the same issue as well. Alongside him is another sort of veteran of the grid in Valtteri Bottas. Now, he's never really gone away. So when I'm at races, you always see him at Mercedes. He's their reserve driver, and he's been very crucial in lending support, advice, being a shoulder to lean on to Kimi Antonelli. He's kind of ever-present, Bottas. That's an incredibly experienced driver lineup, and it makes total sense. You've got guys who know Formula One, who know what it takes to have a winning car, who know what it takes to have that winning mindset, to build everything around them. And that'll be a big stepping stone to Cadillac and how they'll be in future seasons. It makes sense. I think there were lots of different rumors of drivers. There was talk of actually having an American racer within the team, and I think that'll happen in due course, because ideally Cadillac, as an American brand, they'd love to have their American driver in the future. But there was no one quite screaming out at this stage, but that's possibly one to follow in the future. But, it's an exciting time to have an 11th team on the grid. Formula One's on the rise. Cadillac comes with a lot of backing. There's a lot of money, and the company's reputation will be at stake. So they'll want to be competitive. How better to start being competitive with drivers like Perez and Bottas, established race winners in Formula One, and we'll see what happens there. All eyes are now on Zandvoort. So it's a few days until the Dutch Grand Prix kicks off. This is a race that, since it returned to the calendar in 2021, Max Verstappen has dominated. He won 21, 22, 23, didn't win last year. And I've got to be honest, I can't see him winning this year. That's not to say it won't necessarily happen. We've seen him pull off some sprint wins, some race wins, some magical drives. And it's clearly a circuit that suits both him and the Red Bull car over the years. You'd think it's going to be a Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri battle, and that's probably how it's going to be for the rest of the season, not just Zandvoort, but the rest of 2025. But what is amazing about Zandvoort is the sheer volume of Dutch fans that'll be there. They're called the Orange Army, so you can't miss them. They're brightly clad, all in orange tops. Someone said it was more like a football crowd than a Formula One crowd. Very raucous. It's interesting to see how Red Bull will be. Obviously, the last few weekends have been tough. Not everything's gone to plan. They've difficulties. And it's not like they've been able to have loads of time to spend on the car. We've had this summer break, so it's an enforced shutdown. So they actually just started going back to work Tuesday morning. That was their opening day. And there's only so much you can do between that Tuesday and the race on Sunday. Will they pull up some upgrades? We'll find out in due course. Will they be able to be competitive against McLaren? We'll wait and see. Verstappen is such a competitive animal. Like, he's an absolute competitive beast. He's had time off from racing and he lives and breathes for racing. So he'll be itching to get back into the car, itching to be back competitive. We've seen him, he posted some lovely photos and videos on Instagram with his partner, Kelly, and their new little baby, looking like he's having a nice time, but he'll be coming back to wanting to win, or to wanting to be on the podium at the very least, and pushing those McLarens. You know, we've seen these qualifying laps he does, and it is phenomenal what he's able to do. Can he break up their dominance? Be fun to see, but there'll be certainly plenty of people cheering him on. In terms of how that race would go, I guess I'm looking at the McLarens, and probably most people are for the win, but we want to hear your predictions. Now, Rick and I are going to make our predictions on social media, and we'll reveal those there. We'll also reveal the AI prediction. We want to hear from you guys and girls, and let us know what your predictions are. What's your 1, 2, 3 for that race? Mine will be incoming shortly. I just have to work out the order of my McLaren drivers and who's coming in third. Right, that just about rounds it up for this week before we start going racing again on Sunday. Thanks very much for joining us here on the Inside Track podcast. Now, remember, all our episodes are available on our YouTube channel. You can subscribe to us there or follow us on Instagram and TikTok through searching Inside Track Podcast. The Inside Track is funded and made by BBC Studios, a commercial company that's wholly owned by the BBC. It's produced by Jarek Zaba, video editing and social media is by Georgina Revel, and James Cook is the executive producer.